Painting addresses sight. It is first and foremost a visual experience and exists for the purpose of communicating a thought in visual terms. Every picture is a color thought. An attentive viewer is essential to its meaning. My work investigates sensations and perception. By sensations, I mean colors and their dynamic nature. Perception refers to the interaction of colors and the memories and emotions they evoke. My palette references the order of the 12 hues of the color circle, plus black and white. The shapes are simple, geometric color carriers that free the viewer to concentrate on the experience of color effects. Precisely painted, the vertical bands suggest lines, angles, edges. A painter differentiates between pictorial color, color derived from pigment, and perceptual color, color seen as light, momentarily flashing. It appears in the space between the viewer and the painting. It is not photographable, but depends on an engaged viewer and the selection of contrasting colors of the same value. Color painting begins when two colors are placed side by side. They influence each other and seem to change their appearance, either intensifying or diminishing their expression. They almost always are seen in relation to their adjacent color, but most importantly, it is their concerted tension that must resonate in the visual experience of the viewer if the colors are to come alive. This is the moment when painted colors turn into light. In paintings of the past, color served mainly to identify depicted objects, or it had a symbolic function that told a story. But it required the radical advent of abstraction for color to become autonomous. My work explores color behavior and creates color situations that bring new awareness to color effects. They reveal a new language that only painting can bring about and is most likely not encountered in the everyday. Luminous colors, brighter and more brilliant than the painted shapes that generated them, can be observed to appear, disappear, and reappear. My intention is to uplift the viewer. Their experience of pure spectral colors as an expressive power and life-giving force can instill recognition and with it a confidence that leads to change.
Thank you. That's very beautiful. You wrote that this year, didn't you?
Yeah, I wrote it to make myself more understandable to you.
We appreciate that. Thank you so much.
It's difficult to put into words because, as I said before, we don't have an agreement about what is happening in the process of the color becoming light. We don't have the vocabulary. We have the vocabulary for colors. We have the names for the colors, but we cannot explain what happens in that frame.
In the place where perception happens, where the sensation, and the sensation of experiencing a painting,
right,
and experiencing the light that's reflected off that painting into your eye.
Right, right.
I asked you earlier about Immanuel Kant, because of the idea that perception and sensation is one aspect of knowledge or understanding. And Kant, broke it down into a second step, which is conception, which is the ideas in our mind, which in Jungian psychology, for instance, could be called concerned with archetypes. But Kant talked about something that probably is more applicable to how you might like to talk about your work, which is synthesis, which is the idea of bringing sensation and conception together into something that potentially could be communicated between humans back and forth. So we have the perception of the work, what we internally feel, that which is part of who we are inside,
right,
versus the ideas that we have in our mind, the things we learn like language, mathematics, sciences, and the synthesis of those things becomes maybe something that's a place where we really communicate. We talk about how you see a painting, but there really are no words.
No, they aren't. And not everybody has the same experience. You know, I can't say any more about it.
It's very true. It's very complicated. That's why it's so hard to say. The emotional nature of sensation itself, the emotional nature of seeing and feeling a painting and what the painter is trying to express is such an internal, private understanding. And the ability to talk about it, as you say, there are very few terms that really...
Painting wouldn't exist if it didn't have that mystery about it. It has long staying power. It is older than writing, you know. But what goes on inside you, I could not predict or want to direct. I'm painting the painting based on what my desire is for it to become alive, you know, but I'm not thinking about it in terms of, oh, if I put that color here, it's going to be a different interpretation than if I don't. I put that color there because it will ignite your experience. I hope.
And it does. You know, the work is so evocative, especially when you see it in person. And this takes me to another question I wanted to ask, which is, it must be very difficult for you to look at your work on a computer screen, or to see it compressed down, because like what you were talking about earlier in your statement, the idea that the person, the viewer, has to interact with the work, has to be able to stand at a certain distance and perceive it from, you know, maybe even multiple stances.
True.
And when it's compressed down into a computer and all the lines become compressed, I'm imagining that the emotion for you must be very different than experiencing the work in person.
This is true. I probably don't expect to have an experience when I look at the screen. You know, it's purely technically when I have to look at the screen. But when I'm confronting with a painting on a one-to-one basis, something happens. The painting becomes alive, for lack of a better word, and the space expands or contracts. This one here, the golden one, our golden ones, for example, has the same quantity of dark and light. So that's where the balance comes in, but it's subliminal, you know. And the middle passage, the white passage, expands and contracts depending on how you give it your attention.
Well, you're truly a master of both juxtaposition as well as spacing. It's almost incalculable how outside viewer would look at these decisions being made. But there aren't, there's consistencies, but the consistencies seem to be broken up intentionally to create the effect.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned earlier about the way colors are laid down next to each other.
Yeah.
And Albers referred to that as one of his terms as juxtaposition. But does that apply to your paintings, or?
Oh, definitely. It applies to colors in general. If I put contrasting colors next to each other, they attract each other. And there is that sense of liveliness. If I put colors that are analogous, not much will happen, but the change or the contrast can be in the value of the color. Okay, so these are all decisions that help me predict somewhat what I'm going to get, but it's in the end still a surprise, I must say. I can't pretend that I can predict how you react to the painting.
Mm-hmm. And the surprise also happens for you,
Yes.
the artist, when you finish the work.
Mm-hmm.
Because along the process, as you're developing it, you're never quite sure how it's going to move and pull apart. And
I cannot see it because it's taped.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That brings me to this, hard edge. If you want a hard edge painting, you need to tape it. And so part of the painting is hidden while you're working. And you can just anticipate what's going to happen. You don't know. But it needs to be hard edge because so many things happen while you're experiencing the painting. There's movement. There's not only the light, there's movement. There is a sense of liveliness. And if it weren't taped, and if I wouldn't know that it's a straight line, then I cannot tell that there is an effect.
You referenced a time ago about earlier in your career when your work had more of the artist's hand in it.
Mm-hmm.
And you wanted to move away from that because you felt like there were too many questions being asked about form.
Yeah.
And not enough questions being asked about feeling and emotion.
Right.
Can you tell me more about what kind of made that change in your work come about? Was there a particular show that really changed that for you?
It was in the critiques in graduate school. Thank you for asking that question. That's the final step a painter has to make, what direction to go into.
Mm-hmm. So, but this is, correct me if I'm wrong, this is from 2016?
18.
2018.
Yeah, I believe it was 18.
That's a pretty long stretch of painting in your studio without having anybody in your studio bothering you.
That's been the story of my life.
That's great.
People don't feel comfortable discussing it because they are lacking the vocabulary. So this is something we have to work on. And that's why, for me, the viewer is a really important participant in this whole process, because I plan the work with them in mind. And they complete the process and give it purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Without the viewer, without thinking of the viewer, the painting has nothing to give.
That's interesting. I wish I right now that I could offer a counterpoint and name an artist who specifically thought about the process as only being about themselves. But I think because of what you're saying, it's actually, I'm running through the list of so many artists that I've interviewed and talked with, and it really is true. It's a very private
Yes.
internal process
Yes.
that is constantly thinking about other people. It's constantly thinking about those interactions.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, you, like so many artists, you know, that I've spoken to this, I'm thinking about Frederick Hammersley here in the moment.
Yeah.
You know, Fred was one who didn't really, as far as I know, let people in his studio at all.
Mm.
You know, but he would gladly show them the finished work.
Yes, I would show my work. I would open my door, of course, but I didn't expect an understanding. You know, people were joyful. They said it's happy work, or, you know, it makes me feel happy, but we didn't pursue it further.
It's very interesting. Do you know the artist Max Cole?
Yes.
So Max is one. She moved studios. She's now in a small town in New Mexico.
Right.
But when her studio in California, when I visited her there,
Mm-hmm.
she had 3 parts to her studio. She had a large room that she set up for private viewings,
Mm-hmm.
people to come visit. She had another area to show people kind of how she worked.
Mm-hmm.
You know, an area where it's like, it wasn't staged per se, but then she had a private room where no one was allowed into.
Where she worked.
It was like actually closed off, and she wouldn't let
Yeah.
anyone see inside there. But that middle staging room, because I think she was just asked so many times about the process,
Yeah, right.
was some things that she could kind of show them, but she didn't want to show them
Because
her inner.
the words are missing.
Mm-hmm.
That's why she did that.
Because the words are missing.
She said a very smart thing. She said painting has to stay true to itself.
Mm.
And I think that's brilliant, because it walks that fine line between being entertainment or about the artist's life. It has nothing to do with what they're trying to do, or at least I would think so. You know, it has to stay true to itself. Mm-hmm. In order to survive and advance. And I think, you know, tackling the difficulty of color behavior is our next big open area to explore and develop.
Color behavior from the aspect of the artist, or in painting?
Yeah.
You talked a little bit earlier about the color theorist Farber Biren.
Yes.
And some of his ideas that he brought. I always read his work as one being very connected with the emotions of color.
Yes.
You know, pure color and pure emotions. And
mm-hmm.
he even tried to, you know, create his own sort of catalog, if you will, of what emotions kind of dealt with what color. I think it was very influential into industrial design in America.
Right. Yeah.
But I think what you're talking about is something very different than that. For instance, the idea that maybe in some cases red is the color of anger. I think what you're talking about is maybe something that's a little bit more spiritual, in a connection with, say, maybe not pigeonholing red into one type of emotion.
Right.
Can you tell me more about where you think the next generation of color theory and painting is going?
Well, we have to develop the vocabulary to explain the 2 different colors. One color pigment, the other color colored light. Mm-hmm. And what that does. And first become aware of it. You know, when you look at a painting, you may not even become aware that there is a certain light, and Farber Biren talked about that and tried to put it into words. For example, he uses the word luster.
Luster.
For a particular choice of colors that would create this kind of light. And I think he did very important work. in moving that forward. And he said that the viewer has to find the answer within himself or herself. It's not the artist that gives you that message. You have to connect it to your inner life. I couldn't quote anything right now. It catches me off guard. But
it's a very intense subject, I can tell, for you. There's a lot of deep feelings about it that are hard to express. And,
it's true.
You know, I love thinking about those ideas when I look at your work, especially in the show that we have here now, which is 12 years of your paintings that have gone through, as I see it, quite a bit of transition over those 12 years.
Yes, they have.
It starts with Pearly Light being the earliest work in the show from 2012.
Yeah.
And at that time, with Pearly Light, you were still using the full spectrum in your work.
Good, good.
But you've transitioned now, and some of the newer pieces have, I couldn't say a more limited palette, but they're not trying to be fully inclusive in that way.
Right.
And so when you speak about two things, number one, the painting kind of being not self-contained, like Max Cole said, but complete within itself. But also what you're speaking about now, which is this sort of idea of the spiritual connection with the work and where that can go. Has there been some transition from moving away from the full spectrum that has become part of this emotional language for you?
Yes, definitely. Thank you. That was a beautiful observation. When you use all 12 colors, the light is bright, almost screaming. When you want to tone that down, you have two choices. You use less colors, or you change the intensity. You tone the color down so that you get the luster instead of luminosity. So that's what I was pursuing all these years. What kind of light is the painting giving me? First, I used very intense, pure colors, the 12 colors of the color wheel. And then I started to tone it down. And I brought black and white in. And this painting tackled the question of black and white. Black and white is the greatest contrast you can have in painting. And how do I make a black and white painting that sparkles?
I see.
Maybe sparkle is something that Faber-Buren would use, but very few. It's not. It's my vocabulary.
I would say, when you said it, I thought of sparkle as more of an emotional word almost.
Definitely.
Rather than a word of, say, like, fashion or textile. It's kind of a sparkle or a brightness that that you feel inside of you.
And in turn, it gives you a feeling. What that is, I cannot tell. And I would not want to dictate, but something has to happen for the painting to reach you. The sparkle.
The sparkle. It's quite beautiful.
Thank you.
We are so thrilled to have you here at Lewis Stern Fine Arts. It's a very beautiful show that you've painted throughout all these years, and we're just so delighted to have you here. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm very honored to share my work with you.